It is at this point that I have the distinct privilege to introduce to you now Deborah S. Delisle, the Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education and the Principal Advisor to Secretary of Education on all matters related to pre-K, elementary, and secondary education. I'd also like to welcome back to the stage our Editor-in-Chief at Education Week here, Virginia B. Edwards.
I'm back, as I've said before. And this time I'm not going to follow a script. As some of you guys have heard me talk about before, I do think we're at this spectacular moment in time. There are negative sides to this that have to do with the tight economy and needing to really deploy resources within an eyelash worth of margin. But I also think that makes for a lot of opportunity with folks really looking at how to be more productive and more efficient, right? So, but on the more kind of just talking about the issues, and they've been raised all day today, we know it's a time when standards are being implemented, college and career standards. We know it's a time when the policy levers of assessment and accountability are in play. We know that folks are focused on how to get 21st century skills into the curriculum in a more deliberate kind of way. We are taking learnings from brain science and how students learn. I'm looking at Dennis as we talk about the role that arts has in this equation. We care about kids and their social emotional learning and how to engage them, how to motivate them, how to really have these be authentic learning opportunities. So, I mean, we've got a frame for this, and these are issues we care about every day at Education Week. You all, and we're trying to highlight them through this recognition program. I'm so happy to have Deb Delisle here from the U.S. Department of Education. It's a key moment for the administration as well. There are less than 3 years left. We've got the midterms looming, so there's a context for this conversation. So I'm going to have Deb introduce.
So when you point that out, it just reminds me like like at the end, closing in on the end of a job. So.
Oh, no. Let's.
I feel like it's a job notice when people mention that.
You're on the clock, right?
Yeah.
So, why don't you tell folks in a couple minutes what your path has been to get to here. You've been a district superintendent and state chief, so multiple perspectives, and I'll follow up.
Yeah, I almost hate to do this because whether somebody introduces me or I share this story, I feel like somebody in the audience will say, like, boy, that lady can't keep a job. But seriously, this is my 39th year in education, so go ahead and do the math because it was the big birthday last year. And I'm really proud of my background, mostly because I've had an incredible array of people with whom I've interacted that have really helped me to be a better me. I started out as a classroom teacher in Connecticut, and I had somewhat of an unusual career in the sense that every job that I had, I absolutely loved. And I never saw myself moving from that position. And I fortunately had people in my life who came to me at various stages and said, have you ever thought about doing this, or have you ever thought about doing that? And they perhaps believed in me more than I believed in myself. So I did the trajectory of becoming a principal. I worked in the field of gifted education for 15 years. I've been in professional development, curriculum specialist, language arts specialist. I have been an associate superintendent, became a superintendent, which to this day has been my favorite job in life. I loved the students in my district, loved the family and the community, and then became the state chief in Ohio. And that was a trajectory that if you had said to me when I was a little kid, I grew up in poverty, I was a first generation college kid, if you had ever said to me you'd be like leading a school district or a state and now pre-K through 12 at the federal level, I probably would have laughed and saw that as not part of my dream. But fortunately, I had a lot of people who encouraged me along the way. And I think what's a great part of that story is that I have every position that I've had, I've maintained networks with the colleagues who supported me and who helped me to thrive in those positions. And I think it's one of the great untapped sort of stories that we have about all of our career pathways. It's that network of people who help us to be better than we perhaps think we are.
And so did your perspective, or what would you say about how your perspective changed as you made that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, especially when I was a district superintendent, I used to always think like, oh, what the heck are they doing down in Columbus, Ohio, which is where our capital is. Then when I got to be the state chief, I thought, oh, like I'm that person. But then I was able to say, what are they thinking about in Washington, D.C.? Now I have no one else to blame right up the chain. But I think what gave me a perspective each time of, number one, I have figured out along the way that there's a powerful voice that each one has. And I recognized too late that it was a voice that I didn't exercise. So when I was a district superintendent, it was rare for me to go down to Columbus or at the State House. I'd interact with my professional network in the state and relied on them. And then when I got to the state, I realized there was this cadre of superintendents who continuously came to the department and came to the legislative sessions. And I was enthralled by how they knew how to do that, because it just wasn't in my vernacular. And as coming to the department, almost the same thing happened, is I recognized how many state chiefs will call the secretary directly or call me to try to, whether it's to negotiate around a report or to advocate for something that they really need. And so it's like a message that I would have for everybody is to consider you have a voice and to figure out how to exercise that voice. So it's been a totally different outlook. And I have to say, I feel so blessed every day that I get to see the incredible work going on in pre-K through 12 across the country. The greatest part of my job is going out into the field. I love going to see schools and districts, and what some of these places, some of you are doing, it just jazzes me. I'm as energetic now as I was when I stepped foot into Watertown, Connecticut, second grade with 42 kids.
That's great.
I didn't know what I was doing, actually, but.
And let's drill down a little bit into leadership and leadership development. That's a big overlay on why we're here today. What's your kind of frame or perspective on that? And what can the department, or is the department doing to promote leadership development?
I think leadership, especially transformative leadership, is actually something that we just haven't paid enough attention to. And I say that in the general field, but I also say it from the department. The administration, rightfully so, placed a significant emphasis from the very beginning. I've been at the department for 2 years, so before I got there, on having highly effective teachers in every single classroom. And that's a really important goal. But what I found lacking in that, and we're trying to beef up in this term, is to really emphasize the need for highly effective leaders in every school and in every school district. And what we're learning, especially through the transformational work we're doing in school improvement grants, is that leadership matters, and it matters a whole lot. So we have examples across this country of schools, despite all the obstacles they face, of making tremendous strides with student achievement, family engagement, powerful professional learning networks. And behind all of those, there are certainly classroom teachers and families totally engaged in the schools, but it's really transformative leadership that makes that happen. And what I'm finding right now is that we have not done enough, whether it's a department or across the nation with education, that we just really haven't focused on how do we support and most especially train transformative leaders. There are some great folks out there, but I will tell you, there's a lack of transformative leaders to take on and to scale up effective practices.
So what are the concrete things that either the administration or that you could point to in the field as helping raise this up? Because even this conversation is meant to highlight and at a conceptual level, but what are the practical things that can be done?
A couple of things. At the department, there are funds within the budget to reach out and to support principals, and to really build up this notion. The Secretary and the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, Ron Thorpe, just gave out a whole directive and a challenge, if you will, to come up with opportunities for teacher leaders so they don't always have to leave the classroom, creating those transformative issues. And then across the nation, what I'm seeing are powerful networks of principals and superintendents who are forming to really think about what are the challenges associated with, let's say, turning around lowest performing schools. What I'm finding that is lacking in that conversation is institutions of higher education stepping into this arena. There are individual pockets going on, but one of the reasons I'm finding that we don't have a significant cadre of transformative leaders to scale up practices is that institutions of higher ed haven't stepped in. I was thinking about our conversation last night at dinner, and when you were asking questions about higher ed and teacher prep, and I find in leadership prep, both for principals and superintendents, there aren't enough of places that are really doing transformative work. They're not focusing on the need for practitioners to reflect on their practices. They're not developing situations in which people are totally prepared to be courageous leaders. So we have these gaps existing, and I think it's really imperative in this amazing opportunity that you suggest that we think about all segments of adults in the system and figure out that leadership is not about the role, but it's about the interactions between people and among people that's really going to move our schools forward.
So Washington's not exactly been a bed of activity lately in general.
You noticed?
So I did notice. And so you're just mentioning teacher ed, and it makes me think of HEA,
Yep.
Higher Education Act, of course, Elementary
ESEA.
Secondary Education Act has now not been reauthorized for like 8 years or whatever it is. Do you see a danger in the inactivity in Washington to get these new laws in place? Or, there's a lot of momentum and pushback, so
Right.
this thing is teetering right now.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would qualify it as dangerous in the end. I hadn't used that word before, but I think we're at a place where inactivity or a mission of activity, if you will, is just going to stagnate the system and confuse it. So I was listening, for example, to several of the leaders talk about the differences within their states and then among states who are teetering on this question of Common Core, college and career ready standards. Many of you have suggested that it makes it very hard for practitioners because if their state is floundering, they just don't know what they're supposed to be doing in their schools, in their districts, and in their classrooms. So while I feel like there's a sense of urgency in individual places in DC, that urgency doesn't exist. And I think our kids will fail as a result of that. Fail to meet their needs, fail to prepare themselves for a 21st century. And if nothing else could move people, I wish individuals on the Hill and other places would recognize that second and fourth and ninth graders are going to take care of us as senior citizens. So even from a selfish standpoint, if they can help to create this cadre of really intellectually inspired, creative kids, they will help to take care of us in the future. So I just see it as a dangerous slope for us. I also have seen, and I'm sure you've been to other countries, when we talk about other countries who are really successful in education, they have just a very firm commitment across their country that education is the future of their country. And I don't get a sense that we believe that. And, I don't know what else to say. Sometimes it ponders me, and I think, what else would we go back to? It wasn't like we're setting fires to achievement levels, right? So I just really question when people are very condescending or negative about reform initiatives, whether they're from this administration or from what's going on in individual states, because those individuals don't usually offer solutions. It's just what's wrong.
So what do you all think, this is not on my list of questions, what are you all thinking about as the elections loom, about what messages and what work you think needs to be elevated so people can grapple with these issues?
I think, most of our work is dealing with SEAs rather than LEAs, although we do interact with LEAs. I think most of our work has been to help states to think about how to continue their work no matter what happens with the election, because we don't have this big machine that's going to change the course of the elections, but getting people to understand what the reforms are that are going on in their state, and then trying to determine how they can lift it up. So, for example, we were having a conversation with a state yesterday who's very concerned about what may happen in November, and we were just helping to problem solve and strategize around how to better engage businesses and communities in understanding what college and career ready standards are, why they are important. And we are not the people who have the answers, but it's great to be a partner in that thought process.
Yep. What about people who say that the federal government is in the middle of a period of overreach?
That's, we hear that all of the time. And I guess one of my beliefs is, and I changed this since being in the classroom, so going back to one of your questions. So even when I became the state chief, was a state superintendent, I really believed that one of my primary roles was to cast a vision for what ought to happen for all kids in Ohio. And so I think about that with this administration. I would think about it with any secretary who assumes their role in an administration, is that they've got to create a vision for the country of where we need to go with education. What do our kids need to be successful, not just at the local level, but also globally? So if people are questioning overreach, I guess I would have to figure out what's the context of that. You know, is it on the demands? Sometimes people aren't totally aware of what we actually require. I was at a meeting several months ago where an individual stood up, and I was sitting right behind the person, and he was talking about his state and said that they had 92 required assessments. And when the person, a questioner asked him, you know, well, who requires that? And he said the federal government. It was like, I was behind him like, you know, there's misunderstanding about uses of funds, for example, and how we can use Title I funds in different kinds of ways. So we're also trying to be much more forthright about what we actually can do and stand for.
Right. So I've got two follow-ups to that question. One is, what do you think the federal government does particularly well, and what shouldn't it be kind of doing because it can't do it particularly well?
I think from my vantage point, I'm hoping this has changed at least since I've been here in the pre-K through 12 space. I think we're doing a much better job. I don't think it's perfect, but we're doing a much better job of trying to be a partner with states and with districts as opposed to being compliance officers. In fact, in our office of the elementary and secondary ed, we're now moving into we've been planning for a while to move into a new system of interacting with states so that we don't have separate Title I and Title II and Title III monitoring, separate SIG, but that it would all come through a team that's developed who owns, if you will, the state, and there's a lead, one person to interact with at the federal level. And I think that's going to be much more helpful so that we're also moving to outcomes-based monitoring. So not recognizing what being cognizant of the inputs, but not necessarily focused on whether or not you put your list of schools up on the web page, as opposed to what metrics did you use to identify your lowest performing schools, and are the interventions that you're proposing for them working?
Right.
And it's a huge shift, as you can imagine, in a federal bureaucracy for us to think differently. And I know even for states with whom we interact, when they may call and we'll say, well, we don't have the answer to this, but let's help you solve the problem, there are times when it's dead silence on the phone, right? Because they think, well, that's not a role you've played before. So we're moving in that direction. Hopefully that will continue on past this administration. I think we have not yet figured out really well about when to step into states and when to step out. And that's because every state wants something different. Some people will say, don't even come into our state. Or other people say, yeah, we want you here advocating for whatever the program is. So I think we're trying to balance out what's the right line for us to cross or stay away from.
So when you think about what the administration has done with these competitive grant programs, and there are some folks who say that just gives more money to the people who are good at, putting this stuff together, versus real systemic ways of addressing issues that benefit all districts. Yeah. What's your
We are very cognizant of the downside of competitive grants and the tension that exists there. So a number of things that have happened since that kind of surfaced again prior to my coming is that we've been much more systematic, if you will, in thinking about, do we place a priority, for example, when there's a competitive grant, to place a priority on rural districts, which means that they would get additional points for coming into the competition. We have had individuals step up from philanthropy who say we will help other districts, or even at the state level where they may not have the capacity to write grants, they've stepped in to help. I will tell you that when I was in Ohio and we won a Race to the Top grant, there was actually a foundation who stepped forward to help us to think through a process to organize our thinking and writing. So a number of things have surfaced like that. I will say it's pushed in. I've been out in the field when there are people who become disgruntled, and rightfully so, when they don't get money and they put so much work into it. And there are grants that are not funded and that are extraordinary. But they're just below the even more extraordinary grants. And yet those people who get grants have often related, and many of the leaders yesterday shared that a lot of the initiatives that they've undertaken in the district in their districts have actually been a result of competitive grants. So I try to focus really on what's the positive coming out of it, because when you don't have enough money to have everybody receive a part of the pie that's going to make a difference, the competitive grants has been one way to leverage the money.
That's it's been evident that that's been a bet place. So you think about the next 2.5 or so years, and what do you have in your scopes, both as Deb Delisle, but what would you say about the administration?
Yeah, I would say
education?
a lot of the work of the administration in the remaining term really has come into the Office of Elementary and Secondary Ed. The whole focus on early learning is absolutely vital. I think the President has made that clear. The Secretary's made it clear. The designation of an Office of Early Learning is really important, so we're going to continue to push on that, especially because we know that a kid's starting line in kindergarten is not the same for every child. We're going to continue to push on the equity issue. For me, it's really important. I've spent a majority of my lifetime working in urban settings, and I'm on this crusade of our thinking a little bit differently about achievement gaps. Because when we talk about achievement gaps, very often it comes back to the student. You know, if I taught it, you didn't learn it, I offered the course, you didn't come, you didn't show up, parents didn't show up for conferences, and the whole litany. And I'm trying to get us to think more about expectation and opportunity gaps. If we don't provide opportunities for our students, and we don't expect that every kid can engage in that rigorous work or those enriching experiences, I was struck by Dennis's comment about, I almost was waiting for you, Dennis, to say those kids when the board member suggested they shouldn't be engaging in opera work or opera study. So that's a really big piece. With the release of the discipline guidance and the recent CRDC data, I'm really concerned about the inequitable treatment of students and the disparity that's associated with behavioral issues. So that's a really big piece, again, coming out of our office, and safe and healthy students. So we have a lot of issues that I'm just not looking at the end date, because I really feel that we have to continue to deepen our work, and I know the Secretary is just really interested in continuing the work without starting up any new really big programs.
Deb, what would you say about the issue of accountability and how assessment and other, testing, measurement fits in there as you look forward,
not back? I think accountability is a really complex issue, and so often I feel, whether it's at the local level, state, or federal level, I sometimes feel that we're looking for a very simple solution to a really complex problem. And we're trying to fix something that's been broken for quite a while. I will say, when I got to DC, I wasn't quite aware of the level of intensity, if you will, on both sides of the aisle for a need for a very deep accountability system. Mm-hmm. And so what I recognized early on is that we're going to have to go through this very uncomfortable period when people, especially at the legislative level, actually believe that we're really serious about accounting for student learning. Because if you think about it, a lot of what has come to play out is because they haven't seen us as being serious about that. So we have to go through this uncomfortable situation to get to the other side. What I would hope to in 5 or 10 years, beyond my engagement here, would be that we've come to a system where we recognize how to account for personalized learning. How do we ensure that all students are being held to high standards, but that there are support structures in place so that we can much more look at individual student growth and individual student learning. And we get to a point where we can measure what really matters, which is those life skills, and I don't want to call them soft skills because they're not soft, they're essential skills, but how do we measure those, and how do we ensure that every interaction that a student has is developing life skills?
Yep. I would like you all to join me in thanking Deb. It's a big deal she takes time out.
Oh, thank you. And, I have to say, I'm giving great rein to myself right now to be the spokespeople for everybody in this room, but I really want to applaud Education Week, both because I do turn to the back page every week and then read the rest of it, but most especially, I was saying yesterday that it's so critical when we recognize individuals that we're not, what I love about the Leaders to Learn From program is that we're not parsing out and saying only teachers are important or only superintendents are important, but this is recognizing adults who interact with students on a daily basis from every facet, every role in school districts and communities. So I really want to thank you for that vision and passion that you bring to this program.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you so much for your time here today. We're going to move into the next hour here. We have quite an active hour ahead of us. I've gotten word back from Senator Bennett's office that he will be here within the next 20 minutes, so we'll be starting that. So the lunch will begin shortly. I, however, do have 3 more announcements regarding OtterBox and the OtterBox iPad case giveaway. I have 3 more folks, and I just want to say that the number of cards from all over the country, some of our winners are from Little Rock, New Jersey, Rhode Island. It's great to see such a broad spectrum of people from all over the country here. COO Jeffrey Plattenberg from Fairfax County Public Schools, Dr. Anthony Cavana, Patterson, New Jersey, and Deputy Superintendent Marvin Burton, Little Rock, Arkansas. Okay, so at this point, we'll see you back here in 20 minutes. I did want to make one more quick punch for our this live event and for the virtual events that come with it. We value greatly all of the sponsors have been a part of this. The OtterBox giveaway has been really great, and all of our sponsors have been doing, they bring so many innovative resources to school districts all across the country, and they make events like this possible. Thanks so much. Please support them, and we'll see you in roughly 20 minutes back on stage.